Hi, I'm Sheila Layton. Welcome to the Beyond Coincidence Show, where every moment holds a miracle and we talk about seeing the hand of God in our lives. Call it a God wink or a tender mercy or whatever you want. Everyone on this show has seen the hand of God or their higher power in their lives in a very real and personal way. Welcome, everybody. I have another really amazing guest with me today. Her name is Lauren Willardson. You actually might know her from her Instagram, The Work of His Hands. She has an amazing faith-promoting and somewhat quite scary story to share with us. She is beautiful and smart. She just graduated from BYU. She's in Washington, D.C. So anyway, Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you, Sheila.
Yeah, it's so fun to have you. So Lauren, tell me a little bit about what life looks like right now. I know you're in Washington, D.C. What are you doing there? What does day-to-day look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am 24 years old. I just graduated from BYU, which was a lot of fun. I moved out to Washington, D.C. I actually work in the United States Senate out here, which is kind of fun, in like a joint legislative communications position. And I love it. I love everything about the church out here, all my friends. I don't know. It's a good time. It's a fun phase of life.
Wow. So is this an internship or this is a full-time job situation?
Full-time job. My first job after graduation.
That is fantastic. Hey, Lauren,
Thank you.
tell me about growing up. Where did you grow up? How many kids in your family? Where did you fit in? Did religion play a part? All the things.
Totally. Yeah. So I grew up in Draper, Utah. Familiar to maybe some people listening. I was the second of 5 children. So I had an older sister, 2 younger brothers, and then a younger sister. And it was a lot of fun. I love my family so much. We had such a great household growing up. My parents were both strong members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, born and raised in the church. And so religion played a huge part in that, I guess, to your question. Like family home evenings every week, lots of prepping for missions since we were young, role playing as missionaries, all the things, scripture study, prayers, all the things. But it was a great experience, and I was so grateful to grow up there.
That's awesome. Did you always know that you wanted to serve a mission, or was that just something that came a little bit later?
I did always know I wanted to serve a mission. Yeah, I don't know if it was because of those family home evenings or my dad, he served in France and he took us back several times to visit his mission, hoping to inspire us. I don't know what it was exactly, but from a very young age, I remember just promising God that I would serve a mission when I was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5. And ever since I could grasp the concept of it, my life was just focused toward preparing for that moment, you could say.
Okay, Lauren, just tell me a little bit about preparing for your mission. What was that like? Where did you want to go? What your thought process was? And when you opened your call, how that went?
Totally. Yeah. So I was so excited to prepare for my mission. And like I said, it was something that was just such a big part of my life, such a big process. Everything in my life was culminating kind of to this moment in my mind. So I remember I did all the basic things that you did, the mission prep classes through your ward or stake, mission prep classes at BYU where I was attending at the time. I did preparation with my family. I got to go to the temple in actually a pretty miraculous way. I guess I'll just share briefly because it is a really special miracle to me. But basically, I was supposed to go to the temple about 2 months before I left for the field. It was supposed to leave for the field, and COVID was about to hit, but we didn't know that it was going to hit at that time. And I remember it was about a week out from my endowment. I just got these really strong promptings. I needed to go that week to the temple. And I told my parents, and they were like, no, like your grandparents are coming in town next week. It's all scheduled and planned. Like, it's fine. I was like, I don't know why, but I really feel like I need to go this week instead. Like, I just need you to trust me on this. So I ended up like booking a rush appointment, going to the temple, and turns out
your first endowment, like to receive
for
your
my first
endowment?
yes, to receive my endowment. Yeah, so we just kind of went last minute, a week earlier than I'd originally planned, and then the temples ended up closing worldwide 3 days after I was endowed. And so if I had waited to go next week, I wouldn't have gotten to be endowed. Like most missionaries weren't endowed when I ended up going to my field. So that was a huge, I guess, miracle, you could say, as I was preparing for the field, that I was able to have those covenants with me as I left. But then, yeah, I wanted to go somewhere really hard. I termed it on my mission. I felt like I had prepared really hard, so I wanted to go just wherever I could sacrifice the most and do the most good. For God, in my mind, that was kind of a foreign mission. It was like, send me to Africa, send me to like the middle of South America. I'm ready to rough it for God and sacrifice it all. But I remember a little bit before I got my call, like a couple days before, I started getting some promptings that maybe I should open my mind to the idea of a stateside mission. And so I tried to humble myself.
Yeah. What was that like? When you said you got some promptings, what What was that? What would that feel like? Like what exactly was that? Just so the people can understand, because some people don't know what that feels like.
Yeah, that's a good question. It was mostly just like some thoughts, I think, when I was praying, because I would pray like almost every single second of the day about my call, because I knew kind of about when they would be assigning it. I knew about when to expect it. So I was praying for them to send me the right place, to send me where I needed to go, to hopefully somewhere I could make those big sacrifices like I wanted to and work really hard. And I started to be a little bit selfish and just pray that it would be somewhere foreign, as we were getting closer. And as I started to say those prayers, I just felt kind of in my heart and like just some thoughts in my mind. It's like, maybe you should also pray that you can be okay if it's not foreign, to be okay with wherever God wants to send you. So I was definitely the Spirit kind of changing my prayers, changing my heart, um, and my desires. Then I started to just pray that I'd be okay with wherever God wanted me to go. And then I opened my call, and it was to Houston, Texas. And anyone that knows how excited I was and how much I was hoping to go foreign would have thought that I would be super disappointed with that call. But I remember I didn't even think about the fact that it wasn't foreign until hours after I had opened it. Like, my initial thought was just peace. Like, this is my place. This is exactly where I needed to be. And I was so excited to go.
That's so great. You had said, I'd read something on one of your posts where you said, just before you opened your call, you started just feeling really peaceful about
Mhm.
where you would go, which is really cool because you don't want that initial call to be a disappointment. But it sounds like it
No.
wasn't for you.
It wasn't, which was, yeah, really surprising to me. I thought that I would be a little bit frustrated or have to kind of wrestle with that idea if it wasn't this super fancy place I'd been dreaming about my whole life, or whatever, where I could feel like I was going to do this big, crazy work. I was like, oh, like Texas, they have Walmarts there, like there's malls. This is too easy. I was like, I wanted a challenge. But it ended up being the absolute best thing for my life. So I'm so grateful I trusted, God's plan and felt peace in that, so that I went and did it his way instead of my way.
Yeah, that's the greatest gift to learn. So let's
Hmm.
get into this experience. So you get called to Houston, Texas. You have a couple of months to prepare, and it's now COVID because we're talking. You got your call what, like March of 2020?
Yeah, so I got my call, I believe it was March 3rd of 2020, and then COVID hit, right? Obviously, we all know at the end of March in 2020, and I started the MTC on May 5th of 2020. But when I got my call,
Okay.
I was planning to go to Mexico. I was going to get plane tickets to the Mexico MTC. Like, this was, the big plan. It was all, as far as I was concerned, going to go according to schedule. And
Right.
then COVID hit. I returned home from BYU. Like, the campus was shut down. All the MTCs were closed worldwide. And I was one of the very first groups through online MTC in
Oh, so
Mexico.
you did home MTC
I did. Yeah.
the whole time. Oh, okay. Okay,
Hmm.
so then you entered the mission field. So you actually did go out though. You didn't stay home. You did
I
go to
did.
the mission field in what, like May?
Hmm. Yeah, which was another
And
thing, because a lot of people, sorry, just to say, a lot of people at that time were given the decision if we wanted to stay and wait 18 to 24 months to see if COVID passed, we could have like a normal mission, you could say. And that was another decision I had to wrestle with, because I always knew I wanted to go, but I was like, wait, I thought this was the prompting I got to go, but now they give me an option to wait. So I can do tracting and some of these other exciting things we didn't get to do with COVID. And so then I had to receive reconfirmation. They're like, no, I was supposed to go. I was not supposed to wait 18 to 24 months. And then I finally ended up doing online MTC and going out to the field.
so what did that look like before we get into your actual experience? What did
Hmm.
that look like as a COVID missionary, especially in the beginning when they didn't really know anything, how long it would last, what to do? So what did that look like for those first few months anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of crazy. Everything we were doing was completely pioneering, towards the end. And even nowadays, I don't think missionaries know how to do missionary work without technology in a lot of ways. There's so many things that changed from COVID that have never gone back. But in those early stages, we didn't know how to do online MTC. It was like my teacher on her phone in her house in Mexico with her siblings and the dogs next door, and it was just kind of a
Right?
crazy experience. It wasn't like this polished system like they have nowadays. Same
Was
thing
it, did you know
for,
Spanish speaking? Was it
I
Spanish
was
speaking?
Spanish speaking.
Okay, so that's why you had the Mexico
That's why I was
MPCA
Mexico
experience.
PC.
Okay,
Exactly.
got
Yeah. Yeah. So we were figuring that out, and loved it, but it was different. What were the rules for your companions at home? There wasn't like a system set up for that yet. That was all brand new. And then when I got to the field, it wasn't like, yeah, I got to the field first day. Let's go hit the streets. Let's go give out our first Book of Mormons. It was, welcome to the field. We're in our apartments. Like, let's make some phone calls. Let's do some Facebook finding, which no one even knew how to do back then either. We were figuring out how to do Facebook finding as well.
So you were really
But
pioneering this whole thing.
yes, exactly. Yeah, I very much thought my first day in the mission would always be going and knocking doors until nighttime, right? Those are the stories you hear. And my first day was sitting in our COVID apartment, the only times we really got to leave were to get groceries or to like take a little walk in the afternoons or go get the mail, but it was fun.
Wow, that's tough. I mean,
Yeah.
you must be a pretty emotional, resilient girl because that would be really rough. Okay, so let's get into this experience. And now, just a little trigger warning for people. This is kind of a scary thing. This might not be the best for little kids, but we want to give as much background and detail as we can so that people can understand how hard and scary this was, obviously. So just a little trigger warning. So tell me, so you're 3 months into the mission field only, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'd been there for 3 months total, like including MTC. I'd been in field for about 10 weeks.
So we're talking then, so this is the 16th of August, 2020. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to let you get started. How did that day go? How did it start? How did it end? What plans did you have for the next day? Just give us details so we can see where God was moving in this whole thing, because it's really beautiful. Scary,
Totally.
but beautiful.
Yeah. I'll give, I guess, like a little backdrop. There's a lot of information that we can go deeper in wherever you'd like to go. But yeah, so I don't remember too much about the day, if I'm being completely honest. Just a regular day. As far as I remember, it was a Saturday. I think we'd had some lessons and done some finding and invited people to church, as much as we could. Again, everything we did was really over Zoom. It was just a normal day. I remember I got a letter from one of my friends because the last picture I have of myself before everything happened was like holding this letter that my friend gave me so I could send her a picture saying, I got your letter. And that was a miracle to me that I took that picture because now it's like my last picture on the day before everything happened. So I was grateful to have one last picture like that. But I think it was, just a normal day. And then that night when we went to bed, we said our prayers, did everything, the way that we normally do. And then at about
And you
4.
were living in an apartment. You were living in
Correct. I was living in an apartment complex. We were on the first floor of a larger apartment complex, the first like corner apartment in our building. But yeah, in the middle of the night, we woke up to like an intruder in our apartment in the middle of the night. I woke up to him like in between my bed and my companion's bed. And I remember my first thought was just, man, I never wanted something like this to happen. Like, this is always my biggest fear growing up, was someone, breaking into your house. And your parents are like, oh, that'll never happen. You're fine. And then it did happen. Anyway, we woke up to him there and he was very intoxicated. He was attacking my companion and then in turn started attacking me once I noticed that he was in there. And we fought with him for about 15 minutes. And there's so many miracles we could talk about in there. But eventually, I remember we just got to this point where we were able to beg him to leave and be like, look what you've done. Like, can you please just leave? And I remember he had been so ferocious and scary during that 15-minute kind of struggle. And then his face just kind of wiped and he looked really sad and really scared. And he just turned around and left. It always like shocks people that he just left of his own volition. But he turned around and left. And at that point, we were able to call 911 and ended up, I guess, in the hospital on the morning of that Sunday.
So let's talk a little bit about what actually happened to you and, some of the miracles that happened in that 15 minutes that you have shared. I've heard you share some of those things before, and about light. Talk to me about light too. So what happened that you can remember, if you're okay to share some of the details,
Totally.
because it's very horrific. If it's not too triggering for you, to be able to share some of those details and how you called out to God and just some of those miracles that you saw that you actually remember in the moment, because it's so traumatic that I'm surprised you remember. But I think that maybe is a little bit of a gift.
It very much is. I remember one of my very first realizations of the blessings I'd received was in the hospital when I realized I hadn't fainted during the attack at all. I kept thinking I was going to faint from the loss of blood, and when I was in the hospital, they were about to, this is kind of jumping ahead, but they were going to put me down for surgery basically. And I was conscious from the moment I woke up and saw our attacker all the way through the whole attack, the whole ambulance ride, all the way until I signed the papers and went into surgery. And the very first blessing I realized from that was, the word of wisdom that I had been able to keep my whole life and been diligent with. We have the promise, that if you do keep those things, you'll be able to run and not be weary and walk and not faint. And that was one of the big blessings I saw that I'm able to remember and share these things. But yeah, so many miracles from that entire experience that I could talk about. It was obviously a scary thing. You don't really anticipate what to do in those moments. Is very fight or flight. But I remember, so our attacker, I guess I'll say first, had a knife. So I was stabbed 9 times. I didn't realize all of them until later because there was so much adrenaline and things. But I was stabbed from my shoulder here into my chest. I was stabbed in my elbow. I was stabbed through my hand, so there's a stab wound on each side. Then I was stabbed in my intestines, in the top and bottom of my thigh. And then I was stabbed all the way through my ankle at the bottom. So there's a stab wound on each side there.
Lauren, that's so awful.
Yeah, kind of I guess, effect of the attack, but throughout the whole thing, it was me and my companion. We were struggling with this man just trying to kind of aggravate away from the other person so that we could make sure that we weren't just taking any fatal blows, was kind of how it went down. But I remember a couple of special points in the attack. One of them was my companion. She was over in the corner and he was kind of attacking on her. And so I went to go try and aggravate him to get him away from her because, he was dominating and I didn't want her to get hurt. So I went over and I remember I just punched him really hard, trying to get him off of her. That made him really angry. And so he came and started attacking me. And he had me pinned down on the ground and was trying to stab me. And I remember my companion went kind of out of the room and I called out to her. I was like, "Where are you going?" Like, I'm going to die here, basically, right? It's like, "Why are you leaving me?" And she yells back and she's like, "I'm going to go pray." And my first thought was like, "Oh my goodness, why didn't I think of that?" Like, here we are in this life or death situation and it hadn't occurred to me to pray. And I try not to beat myself about that because we were, moving fast and things. And it was only a matter of a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm so grateful that she thought of that.
When he was attacking her, she wasn't praying, right?
Fair, fair, yeah.
It wasn't until you took him away from her that she was like, "Okay, I have a little presence of mind. I'm going to pray."
She was like,
but,
no, exactly.
About that.
Yeah, no. But I was grateful that she had that prompting. So she went into the other room and knelt down and started praying. And that, first of all, was a miracle for us because the day before, or 2 days before, we had been reading in our missionary standards where it talks about like violent attacks and assault. And it says you may choose to defend yourself with like kicking, biting, hitting, screaming, and praying is the last one. And we made kind of a joke about it at the time. We're like, "Oh, who would choose to pray in a situation like that? Haha, like who's going to stop to do that?" But we did, and that was a miracle to us that we'd read that just the day before to have that presence of mind to go say a prayer. And that was all my companion. But also I was able to pray just by screaming prayers. I wasn't able to go kneel down, but I always say that was the moment when our apartment became like my sacred grove, where I felt God's presence so clearly as like my enemy. To me, like could be Satan for all I knew. The darkness was trying to overcome me. I just called on Heavenly Father's name to save me as powerfully as I could. And I instantly felt his peace and his presence there with me. Right.
Wow. So you just yelled.
Mm-hmm. I was like, my prayer was simply just calling for Heavenly Father. And I don't think I've ever said a more powerful prayer in my life, or felt more connected to heaven. So I learned it's not about the words at all. It's about just those feelings in our heart that when we need Heavenly Father, that He will be there for us. And I think that was kind of the glimpse I got that everything was going to be okay, whether we died in the apartment or whether we didn't. I knew that God was aware of us. I knew that He was there watching over us in that instant.
Wow. And it was dark the whole time because it's 4:00 in the morning and all the lights are out, right? So it was dark.
It was, yeah. Yeah.
And so at some point he just stopped?
Yeah. So at some point I remember I just had this thought. I was like, if we don't get the knife away, we're not making it out of the apartment alive tonight. Like I just had this thought in my head. And so I was just trying to think of a way to get my hands on the knife. I was like, no matter what happens, we just got to get the knife away from him because then it could be okay. And I don't remember exactly how it went down, like the exact process, but somehow we ended up, me and our attacker, with like both of our hands on the knife. We'd both gotten our hand on the handle of the knife. And it was a pretty big, it was like a kitchen knife. It was about like this long, I would say.
Wow. So like 10 inches or whatever, like pretty long.
Yeah, like a big straight kitchen knife. And I just remember we were standing, like facing each other, with our hands on the knife, and he was trying to push it down into my head, and I was trying to push it up away from my head, and we were facing each other, like breathing really heavily, and I knew I could die in that moment, like if my muscles gave out or he just had this burst of strength and pushed it at the last minute, I was gone. I was going to be dead. But I could see so much clarity and strength in that moment. I felt like stronger than I ever had, even though I was like bleeding out all over our floor. I felt the presence of angels, honestly, with me. And I felt that strength. And I knew that, if I did die, if I didn't see my family again, that was going to be okay. And I was going to go right to heaven, which is a crazy thing to say now. It sounds so strange saying that, but that's the type of confidence that I had and that I strive for now every day since that time, knowing that at one point I had that confidence to go and meet God, right? That I was going to be ready for that. But luckily, it wasn't God's will for us to die. I ended up kind of falling back to the floor with the knife. And me and my companion were both kind of just laying there on the floor, and we looked at him and he looked at us, and we're like, you've done enough, like, look at what you've done. Can you please just leave, And that was when his whole countenance just completely changed, and he turned around and he left. Call it the power of the priesthood, I think, for sure, in our covenants. Call it, the Holy Ghost, whatever it was working on him. He was able to turn around and he left.
Wow. That's really very emotional to think about, like that you were surrounded with angels, that the Lord it wasn't your time to go or your companions, and that he just took that man's cold, hard heart and said, enough. And he left. Like, Lauren, that's such a beautiful, as hard and horrible and terrifying as that is, but that you had the presence of mind to see the hand of God in that is wow. So then tell me,
for sure.
Then tell me what happened. So you're laying on the floor, he's gone, it's dark. Tell me about the light.
Yeah. I just want to say really quick too, before we go to that, you just made me think of this kind of for the first time, but what a miracle it is, that we don't always have to have logical answers for why things start or stop in our lives. I think that's something that a lot of people question when they hear my story. They're like, wait, he just left? Like, how did you get him to leave? And I think what you just said was beautiful, because we don't necessarily have to make the trial end, or we don't necessarily need to get the bad thing to leave in our lives. When God says it's enough, and he can end it at any point that he chooses to. So I love the way that you said that, and I wanted to thank you for that. But yeah, so we were there after our attacker left, and I think that was when the real fear set in, because at first it was just, like I said, fight or flight, just struggling to survive. We're just trying to, make it through every next minute. We're not really thinking long game. But as soon as he left, we were able to realize for the first time what he'd actually done. We were able to look around and see how much blood we'd actually lost. I didn't notice. I knew that I had been.
Well?
What was that?
Was she injured as well?
She was, yeah. So we both had multiple stab wounds, and we hadn't realized like where we were stabbed or anything like that until after we left. And so I remember I looked down and saw, I'm not to be super graphic, but multiple parts of my body hanging open, not something, like seeing inside your body. That's not a good thing. And so then we started to go a little bit into panic mode, and my companion went to go call 911, and I started to try and like bandage some of my wounds. And the first thing, yeah, like gotta stop the bleeding somehow. I was not probably as trained as I should have been for that. But the very first thing that brought, I guess, like the situation, you could say, was I looked down at my hand. And like I mentioned before, I was stabbed all the way through my hand. And I don't know why, but I have a very like visual memory of the first time I read Les Mis in 10th grade. And we read about how one of the characters got shot through her hand. And I remember thinking, like, that must have been the scariest thing that could possibly happen to anyone. Like, I cannot imagine looking through your own hand, And then here I was in this moment with basically like the same injury, but it didn't scare me at all. It didn't, I don't know, like give me any trauma to see that it actually brought me so much comfort. Of all the places that I was noticing I was stabbed at, when I looked down and saw that one, it instantly made me think of Jesus Christ, right? Whose wounds obviously are so much more incredible and powerful. And I don't want to compare that in any way, but to me, it was just a token to be like, I know who you are. I know where you are. And I suffered this first, And it was for me just a personal sign of that. And so I felt peace in that moment, knowing like, it's okay. Like I am bleeding out. I don't know yet if I'm going to make it out of this apartment. I have all these stab wounds, but Christ has been here, and Christ is here, and Christ is in me, and I knew that we were going to be okay from that. And so then with that confidence, I guess you could say, I went to our bathroom to hopefully try and bandage up my wounds and wash them the best I knew how. And I went to go turn on the light in the bathroom, and my companion was like, oh no, don't turn on the light. And I was like, I really need to turn on the light. Like we've been fighting in the darkness.
Around in the dark, right? You're still bouncing around.
We're still in the dark. Obviously our eyes have like adjusted very well at this point, because we've been fighting for a number of minutes now. But like the whole thing felt very much like a horror movie, right? You never expect something like that to happen. And the whole time you're like, is this real? Like, is this actually my body? Is this actually my life? Am I dreaming? And so I really just needed the light to be on, to know that like this was reality, and to be able to get back in touch with that and know that everything was going to be okay. And she was like, no, like we're going to faint. And I had to promise her, like, I'm not going to faint. I just need to turn on the light. Like everything is better in the light. And as soon as I did turn on the light, I just felt so much peace. I actually remember feeling like reconnected to the world, to myself, and to just this peaceful knowledge, like everything was going to be okay, because I could see clearly and I had greater confidence. And I always share that to show how like the Lord works in light and the devil works in darkness. I think that if we had at any point thought to turn a light on our attacker, he would have been scared and he probably would have run away, because he was wearing a mask. He was trying to hide his identity. And Satan always works under the cover of darkness. So I'm like, if we had just turned the light on the situation, how different it would have been. It wouldn't have been as scary because we would have been able to see clearly what we could use to defend ourselves. We would have been able to see better where he was instead of this like lurching at us from all different sides. It would have been a much different fight if we were fighting in the light instead of in the dark. And I think that's the power that Christ adds.
That's a
Right.
really cool point.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right? Like if, I mean, obviously you didn't think about it, but that might be something they want to add to that little part of the, of the mission book to say, is it in the book, the mission training book that you were reading the day before?
It was in the missionary handbooks. Yeah, there's the regular handbook and the appendix. Not Preach My Gospel, no.
But just in the missionary handbook. So that might be something really good to add, for them to add to that, right? To be like, hey, if that ever happens to you, turn the light on.
Turn the light on. Yes, you can see what you're doing, see who you're fighting against, be able to communicate, because it's really hard to see where my companion was, who's on my side, where he's coming at me from. But when you're fighting with God, in the light, it's so easy to see Satan's attacks. It's so easy to see those temptations. He's not going to catch you by surprise. And it just, like I said, it's a much different fight.
Yeah. And I mean, I love the connection that you made, that God works in light, right? Mm-hmm. Light dispels darkness in all its forms. And that you made that connection right there that night or that early morning. That's crazy to me. So your companion called 911.
Mm-hmm. She did. Yes. Well, I was in the bathroom doing my thing.
Yeah. So how long did it take them to get there? And what do you remember of that experience and the little miracles that you saw?
Yeah. I remember it took them a good amount of time to get there. We were always like, oh my goodness, why is it taking so long? If I ever am a political person, maybe we'll look at 911 reform, because it was a really long time. And I was honestly afraid I was going to bleed out by the time they got there. Like I had lost like complete feeling to the left side of my body. I couldn't walk by the time they came. I was totally stiff. Couldn't move my arms or legs. But I remember they got there and the operator of 911 was on the phone with us the whole time. And she told us when they got there, she was really, really scared to reopen our door again, right after just locking out this attacker.
Sure.
Going to physically reopen the door to let a strange person into our apartment isn't the easiest thing to do. So that took a lot of faith. And there are lots of, I guess, analogies you could take from that as well. But we eventually had the officers come. They were able to survey and secure the premises. And then our paramedics came, had to carry me out to the ambulance. And that was kind of when I noticed for the first time how many times I had been stabbed. I remember I was so confident in the ambulance. I was like, I was stabbed 4 times. This is where I was stabbed, all these things. And they kept rolling me over and finding more stab wounds that they would find. I know. So that was a whole process. But at that point, me and my companion were taken different ambulances to the hospital. And while we were going to the hospital, I guess I couldn't contact anyone or anything. We were just kind of staying alive at that point. But when we got to the hospital, I knew we needed to call our mission president and let him know what had happened. And we were especially concerned because we had like a number of appointments for that day that weren't going to happen either. We had friends that were like planning on us for church, and we had these lessons, and we were like, no, our friends are going to think we abandoned them. And so as soon as we could, we called our mission president. Bless his heart, he'd only been there for a couple of weeks at that point. He was brand new.
Oh, wow.
They come in July, and it was the beginning of August, right? So he was brand new to the area. And I just gave him a call, and I was like, President, he said, sister, what's happened? Because obviously he could tell something had happened by the distress in my voice and the fact that I'm calling him at like 6 a.m. on a Sunday. But I was like, this is what happened. This is the situation. And he asked where we were. And I was like, honestly, I don't know. And I couldn't even pick up my phone either, was the thing. Like, that was how weak I was. It was just so exhausting for me even to talk. And they were about to like operate on me. And I was like, okay, I don't know where I am. I'll ask them, but I have to call you back later. And I just hung up the phone on him.
No,
And
he
I
would have
feel
been
so bad.
terrified.
I
Oh my
know.
God.
I know. I feel so bad. But that's kind of what happened because I had my lung collapsed in two places. And so they did an initial kind of surgery to put in a chest tube before I went into surgery on my intestines and the other things. Um, and so they told me I had to put my phone away to do that. But anyway, during that time, apparently our mission president's wife, they said they were up earlier than they normally were. That morning, for whatever reason, they had gotten ready and were up super early. And so as soon as they got that phone call, they just decided to say a prayer and just drive, just get in the car and start driving and trust that God would lead them where they needed to go. Because again, they didn't really know the area, but they got in the car and they started driving. And eventually, after that was all done, I was able to ask a nurse what hospital we were in. And ever since I hung up on my president, I had immediately started getting floods of texts, right, from our bishop, the stake president, mission counselors, like all these people trying to contact us. And like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? And I could see all these messages, but I didn't have the energy to pick up my phone and respond to
I'm
them.
actually in surgery. I almost died, so I
Yeah.
can't respond.
So as soon as I was able to ask the nurse, I was like, hey, what hospital are we in? And she told me. I just picked the very first text. I had no idea who it was. I just typed the name of the hospital and hit send, and that was just kind of my prayer to the world, like hopefully this gets where it needs to go.
Right?
Yeah, turns out I ended up sending it to our stake president, who I had never met, but I sent it to our stake president. He was able to give it to our mission president in a matter of minutes. And when our mission president got that information, he was right outside the hospital, which was a
Aw.
miracle for me. Yeah, because I was about to go into surgery a second time. And while this whole thing had been, I guess, elapsing, they told me I needed to have surgery on my intestines. And they told me I would potentially die in the surgery, but I would definitely die if I didn't have the surgery. And I didn't really like those odds. And so I was like, oh, can I get a second opinion? Can we transfer me to another hospital? And they basically told me flat out that if I transferred to another hospital, I would be dead by the time I got there. So I was like, okay, we don't have very good options. So they wanted me to sign these papers to do the surgery, and I told them I wouldn't until my mission president got there to give me a blessing. And that really frustrated them because they could literally see me dying and wanted to whisk me away and save my life. But I was preventing them because I wanted to have a priesthood blessing. And so literally with them being right outside the hospital, they were able to rush in the nick of time to give me that blessing right as they were about to just kind of override my papers and take me in anyway. So I was really grateful for that.
So you had the surgery, and at what point did your mom and dad get a call? Because they're in Utah, you were in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
How did that go for them?
Yeah, so I called my parents after I called my mission president, kind of in between the initial call to my mission president and him showing up to give me that blessing. Basically, I was able to call my parents and not the call that anyone wants to get in the morning.
No.
My parents had my dad had a set like ringtone, I guess, on his iPhone that he had for me when I called. And so I called him and they're like, hey, what's up? Thinking I just got to call for an extra P day or something on Sunday. And I told them what had happened. And obviously they were in shock, very alarmed. I ended up giving it to the nurse to explain everything that happened because it was too much stress for me to explain. But I mostly just called them because I wanted their advice on whether or not to go into that surgery because I didn't know if I did die, I wanted obviously to be able to talk to my parents before I went in. So I asked their opinion. They agreed that I should do the surgery. And then while I was in the surgery, they flew out to Texas so that they were there in Houston with me by the time I got out of surgery, which was a miracle for them as well. Yeah, so they just got on the first flight. They left my siblings with my grandparents and our neighbors, and they said, we're going. So they left.
Oh.
But yeah, that was miraculous too, I guess, just because during that time it was COVID and the hospital was in lockdown and no visitors were allowed. But the CEO of the hospital was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And obviously seeing the news, knowing what this would mean to missionary parents, he was able to give my parents and my companion's parents special permission to be able to get in the hospital to see us at a time when there were no visitors allowed. So when I got out of surgery, my parents were able to be there with me.
Well, that's awesome. How long were you in the hospital? So you had those two surgeries that day. Did you need more surgeries? And how long were you in the hospital?
No, so that was my only surgery. So I technically only had like the one surgery on my intestines. I guess they didn't count the chest tube as a surgery because you have to be conscious for it. You're just on different medicines and drugs and things. But I was in the hospital for, I believe it was 8 days. We got in on Sunday morning, obviously around like 4 or 5 a.m. And then I left Sunday afternoon the next week. They just got me basically stable enough to go home. And then because of my double lung collapse, we had to drive home, and then we drove the route closest to Pop. I couldn't fly. Yeah, I
So
couldn't
they
have
let you go
flown.
home a week later with your mom and dad back to
Yes.
Utah?
Yes. So a week later, I wasn't released yet. They waited for my state president to release me. And I didn't want to go home. I thought they were just going to stitch me up and send me back to my area. And then I didn't realize all of the repercussions of this. But anyway, they finally convinced me I needed to go home and heal for a little bit. So on Sunday, we left. We were able, all of our mission came together to say goodbye to us at this church building in the area. We were able to say goodbyes, and then we drove home on a route closest to the hospital. So we drove up through Oklahoma and Nebraska and Kansas and across through Colorado
Oh,
back
wow.
to Utah. And I just laid flat as a board, like in the back seat, because I couldn't sit up at all. And then I went to the hospital for several months after that for
So
various
you
things.
went to the hospital like for physio, or you had to go and stay in the hospital?
I went to the hospital just for like different appointments, not necessarily, it wasn't physical therapy at first, but like just to keep fixing things, right? They got me to the point where I was not going to die. And then after that, we had to leave and go back to Utah. And then all of the additional, like I could barely, like after the surgery in Texas, I couldn't sit up, I couldn't walk, I couldn't eat, I couldn't use the restroom on my own, all of these things. I didn't eat for the first, I think it was like 6 days. And then I had to reintroduce food, relearn how to walk, sit up, all these things. But even when I left, I had a walker. I could barely stand and take like some steps. My whole arm and shoulder and hand were all frozen. I couldn't move them or use them at all, things like that.
Yeah.
And I still had a lot of different equipment going on me. And so I went to the hospital for the next couple months to keep figuring that out.
And then they started physiotherapy. So how long before you were sort of 80%, like healed and walking and eating and had done a bunch of physiotherapy probably regularly?
Yeah.
How long was that process of healing?
Yeah, so when I went home, my goal for myself was to be back out on my mission by Halloween, was my goal that I set for myself. So we got home.
You did 2 months?
Yes. So I'm trying to think. It was like a 4-day drive home, I think. So we got home around like around August 30th, right around the end of August. And then my goal was within 2 months to be back out to the field. I did not end up making that just because it took longer to process my new call and to do all the paperwork and all the approvals. I was. No, that was the thing. I was physically able to go back out by Halloween. At Halloween, I was able to hang out with my friends at BYU. We did fun Halloween things. I dressed up with my family. I was able to take care of myself at that point, which was a miracle. I still did like little check-ins with my physical therapist after that. And obviously, like to this day, there are some things.
9 times?
Yeah.
That's a miracle in and of itself that you could really get back to almost normal life in 2.5 months after that. Like, that's crazy to me.
It was such a miracle. Yeah.
Those were some traumatic things in your chest and, and in your shoulder and in your thigh. Like, and the fact that you got stabbed in the thigh and it didn't hit an artery, like, those are pretty miraculous things.
Right.
So now we're at the end of October, you're feeling good and you are wanting to go back to your mission in Texas. So what happened?
Yeah, so just to your point really quick on that, it was interesting because my physical therapist, he was a stake president, and so he kind of knew the whole missionary process and everything, and he heard my goal originally and then just didn't say anything, and after, like, originally he told me the book he had to read about me was like this thick of all of my like medical records. He's like that was how much there was that he had to work through.
For people that don't know, she just held up her finger and the book was like 2 inches thick.
Yeah, it was a big book. But yeah, so then after when I was about to leave, so it was a total of exactly 5 months that I was home of like recovery and waiting time. And when I was about to leave, he told me, he's like, when you told me your goal to go back out, I didn't want to burst your bubble. I didn't tell you this, but I was positive it was going to be at least 1.5 years, absolute minimum, like before you went back out. Like there was no way. And this is a trained, physical therapist and stake president. He's like, there's no way. And he told me that because he just wanted me to know what a miracle it was. He was like, there's no way that you should have been able to heal from all the things you had as quickly as you did. And he basically bore testimony to me that was God speeding up my healing so I was able to go back out. Having that motivation to go and return to serve was the biggest blessing to me. It helped me mentally, it helped me physically, and I think it added God's blessings to that to help me go back and heal way quicker than I would have otherwise. So very grateful for that. But yeah, I wanted to go back out. It was quite the process. I basically wrote a letter to the missionary department. I had to state my intent to return. I said I was okay to go back to Texas and would love to. I said I was also okay to go to a foreign mission if they wanted to, trying to get that plug one more time. I was like, maybe this was the time.
Yeah. Your mom would have said no.
Yeah. So I sent that in, waited for a long time. My parents had to give approval for me to go back out, which was very interesting to your artery comment because they asked them, they're like, how are you okay with your daughter going back out? Like, are you sure this is okay with you? And my parents recounted to them that the surgeon had originally told them after my surgery that I was stabbed right here in my arm between a main vein and a main artery. And the surgeon had basically told them that if the knife had turned a single degree to the left or to the right, that one of them would have been completely sliced through and I would have bled to death long before the ambulance ever got there. And they basically told our stake president, like, if Heavenly Father can protect our daughter down to the millimeter in an apartment in Houston, Texas, there's no place that we can, better protect her. There's no better place for her to be than in the service of the Lord. So I always love my parents' example with that. Yeah, and their faith. I think it's way harder to be the parent in that situation than it is to be a little, like, bright-eyed 19-year-old, I don't know, going back out. But yeah, so I did that, and then I waited for a long time, and then I was in Walmart one day in December. It was 2 days before Christmas, and I got a call from my bishop, and he said, "You want to know where you're going?" And I was like, "Bishop, this is not how I expected to receive this." Anyway, so I rushed home and sat down with my family, and he said, "You're going to Tempe, Arizona," and that's it. I didn't get like an official paper or official call. He just said, "You're going to Tempe, Arizona," and I was leaving in about a month. I left, I think it was January 26th, and it was December 23rd, so I had about a month to get everything together. And then all of a sudden I was back out cold turkey. One day I was with my family doing all the fun things. I didn't have MTC this time, so I just went, and the next day I was in the field.
Wow. Now, by that time, now we're almost a year into COVID, were you able to do a little more regular missionary stuff, or was it still just all online?
It was still pretty online. We did a little bit more missionary stuff. Like, it just progressed slowly throughout my mission. It was like we'd go to church with masks. We'd have to sanitize the church beforehand. We would sit with social distancing, all those things. We would do a lot of Facebook work. We still weren't allowed to street contact anyone. Like, you weren't allowed to approach someone and actually talk to them.
Right.
And then we got to the point where we were allowed to approach people and talk to them, and that was reintroduced. But you had to have all of your lessons outside, social distance with masks, and then it kind of slowly evolved to you can have them, or you can have your lessons outside social distance without masks, and then inside social distance with masks, and then eventually
that all
obviously
happened
inside.
in that part of your mission. Oh, that's cool.
Exactly, yeah. So I got to see it go from kind of coming back still pretty thick to the end of my mission. Finally, we were able to just teach normally, no masks, no social distancing. So that was fun to see.
When did you return home? Like from Arizona?
I returned home May 3rd of 2022.
2022. Tell me, let's just talk for a minute about going back to Texas. Why did you go back? How special was that experience? Were you scared? And paramedics and doctors that you got to see and all those little miracles. Tell me a little bit about that and about the trial.
Totally. Yeah. So
just talk about first why you went back.
Yeah. So I went back, like you just said, for the trial of our attacker. Something had been scheduled for a really long time, actually. I was supposed to go back several times, actually, when I was a missionary in Arizona. We had everything squared away. I had permission that I was going to fly down as a missionary, meet my old companion who was now released, but I was going to she was going to be my companion, you could say, and watch over me so I could go and testify in the trial, and then fly back solo to Arizona, back to my area to continue working. And so we had a couple different takes where I literally drove up to the mission home, was about to fly out, and then the attorney or someone would cancel or move the trial. And this happened like 3 or 4 times throughout my mission. And it got to the point where they finally wanted to have the trial. It was like the last week of my mission. And I was like, no, we've rescheduled it like 3 or 4 times. I am now finishing my mission. We'll just wait and do this after I get home. Like, this is my turn to reschedule. So we bumped it one more time. Because at that point I was like, I didn't want my parents to come with me if I was a missionary, because I didn't want to see them in the middle of my mission again. I'd already done that one time, but I was like, we'll just wait, and then I'm gonna be home next week, and then my parents can come with me. So that was really nice. And so I got home, and just a little bit after I got home, they brought us out to Texas for the trial of our attacker. I was summoned to testify, and so was my companion. And so we were able. I mean, kind of. It was kind of cool as well, I guess you could say. I love the law. I mean, I work in law and politics, kind of. So it was fascinating for me in a sense to be in court, but it was scary for sure seeing our attacker again for the first time. I mean, it had been like 2 years since it happened. You've been sitting with all of these questions and all of these thoughts about it, and then I had never, seen the police footage or like heard the 911 call, or any of these things. And so then by
Oh,
being there and seeing all this evidence, we got a lot of answers ourselves, or at least I did. Can't speak for my companion, but I got a lot of answers about things that happened as I was trying to remember, trying to piece together, from the situation. And then our attacker was able to apologize to us before they took him away, basically, which was a really special experience as well to
what
be
was
able
that
to
like?
hear
So
that.
did
Yeah,
you know that he was going to do that?
we didn't. No, they just gave him a moment because we heard his whole testimony and we heard the judge question him and all these things. We were able to be present for that. And then kind of before they took him away at the end, they're like, is there anything you'd like to say to these women, before you leave, basically? And he said, yeah. And he just turned around and looked back into like the guest viewing area we were sitting and spoke directly to us in Spanish. And my heart like went through my toes. It was completely nerve rattling, to be face to face with someone who had done something like that to you. Again, that was just crazy. But it was special to be able to hear his sincere apology, and to be able to all have closure in that way and try to extend some grace to him. Because I do feel bad for him. He's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. And I felt so sad that he experienced that, he's going to have to work through that. So I think that was a really good healing moment. And then after that, like you said, I got to go do the fun things. I got to go visit my apartment and see the paramedics who helped us.
Just
And
one second. When he said, I'm so sorry, for what I've done,
Mhm.
in that moment, were you still mad and angry, or did you feel like maybe you could forgive him?
That's a good question. I think one of the biggest blessings of Christ's atonement in this whole experience is I never felt any anger towards the man who
Wow.
attacked us. I always say that it was Christ kind of taking that portion from me, knowing that I would have so much to deal with, mentally and emotionally and spiritually and physically. He's like, let me just take that little part away so you don't have to deal with that. Because I never did. Ever since like the very first moment, I just felt sorry for him. When we saw how sad and confused he looked when he was leaving, it just hit me like he's gonna have to live with this and what he's done. And that I feel like was punishment enough. I just felt so sad for him. And I always have felt like I was able to separate what he did versus him and think of it more as like Satan was our attacker and he was the one trying to take us down. And this poor person just put himself in a place where he was able to be used by the devil, right? But it's not him per se. So that's kind of how I've always thought of it. So I didn't feel,
That's
yeah.
really profound for someone as young. I mean, you were by that time, what, 21 years old?
Hmm.
Being able to say, okay, there's a difference between the man and the action,
Hmm.
right? The man's
Yeah,
still a child of God. His action was evil, but I don't see evil in him. Like that would take most people years and years to get to. And you're just a young little girl and you got there. And that's, like you say, that's the atonement at its finest. And
it
you
is.
understood that. That's a blessing of being a missionary and being,
It is.
young and understanding that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So then you got to do the fun things. So tell me the fun things you got to do.
Yes. So while we were there, yeah, we got to go back to my apartment, which didn't know if we wanted to do that, but I was like, no, we need the full circle healing. It's like getting back on the horse after you get bucked off, right? Like you got to do it. You're never going to
Were
ride the
you
horse
nervous?
again.
Was your heart racing when you walked up?
I was. No, it was crazy. And I hadn't even been there for very long. We only lived there for a couple weeks when the attack happened as well. So I was like trying to find it, make sure it was the right apartment, all the things. So I was mostly just so emotional to go there. And I thought it would feel really scary because it had felt so eerie and haunted, the last time we were there, obviously, being taken away by police and ambulances and all this stuff. But when I went there, I just felt so much peace. Like I had mentioned before, it really had become like my sacred grove. It was my holy ground. And I was able, to pray there and to just have this really, really sacred full circle moment that I was grateful for to see how Christ had taken, something that was so terrible, so scary, and made it a beautiful, special place for me that I wasn't scared of anymore. It was the last piece kind of holding me back or the last memory. And he let it all go. I expected to find all this fear and anger and stuff, and I didn't find any of that there. I only found peace. So I was grateful
So it
for
was
that.
really an ashes to beauty moment for you then.
It was very much so. Yeah.
God is so good, right? Like
Hmm.
you said, rather than it being a horrifying memory for you, it became a sacred experience. That's
It
beautiful.
did. Yeah. Yeah. And then we were able, when we landed, I had this idea. I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but I was like, man, how wonderful would it be if I was able to track down the paramedics and doctors who had cared for us? And I had a couple contacts for some of the doctors and nurses from my parents from when they were there. And then I actually had started my social media page, obviously, before I went back on my mission to Arizona. And through that, I actually had one of the paramedics reach out to me while I was a missionary in Arizona over Facebook,
Oh,
and
cool.
was able to connect with him. So once I got to Texas, I had this idea to reach out to him and the other people that I had connections with and see if there was any way that we could see them while we were in town. We were only in town for like just over 48 hours, so it was a really short trip. But we were able to make it happen, and everyone kind of arranged their schedules. We weren't able to see everyone, but I was able to see all of my paramedics and most of my nurses and my trauma surgeon. And it was so special just to be able to thank them. You think, how can you thank someone that saved your life? Like, you can't. And there's no way I could ever repay them, but it was so special to be able to just walk in and see them again and show them that I was okay. I think a lot of the work they do is thankless work. A lot of the people, they never see them again. Like the paramedics told me, they just get people to the hospital and then they don't really get to hear the rest of the story. They don't know what happens after that. And like, it was important to
Wow.
let them know that I was okay and also show them that they literally were my saviors on Mount Zion and that I will never forget them. And that was just the biggest miracle for me to go and get to tell them that, and see them again.
That's so special. Like you say, because as a paramedic, you bring the patient and you leave. You don't know what, even if they survive. And for them to be
Exactly.
able to see you and hug you and know that you are doing so great, that had to be really beautiful and special for them too. I bet it was very emotional for everyone.
It was very emotional for everyone. You're right.
Oh, I love that so much. I did read something about, tell me, when you were flying to Houston, there was a couple
Hmm.
of cool little miracles that happened there. Tell
Yes.
me about those.
Yeah. So when I was flying to Houston, obviously super nervous, a little bit stressed. It was this crazy experience. And I had a couple different things. I guess one, I think I know which ones you're thinking of, but before I share those, this one that happened even before that, when I was in the temple, I was able to go to the temple and do an endowment session before I left. And I wanted this question of just like what God wanted me to know going into this experience, basically. And when I left, I remembered being so impressed just that God loved and cared for our attacker the same way that he loved and cared for me, which was crazy to me. That like Christ died just as much to save my attacker as he did to save me. And
Wow.
that was something that that was an idea that kind of, yeah, struck me like, wait a second, I'm the missionary here. I'm the one that's been doing everything good. I'm the one that was hurt. I'm the victim type of mentality. But as soon as I felt that truth, I was like, wait, you are so right. I completely changed how I approached the trial, right? Like, I didn't even want him to go to jail because of something that he'd done. It was like, I realized he had to because of justice and because he couldn't hurt anyone else and we couldn't allow him to continue hurting other people. But I didn't feel that anger towards him, and I knew that just like Christ had died to help me, cope and recover and heal, he also died to forgive and redeem, and to heal the man that done it to us. So that was a big miracle for me. But then we got to the airport and we realized that on our same plane, so I went to an LDS private school in American Fork, Utah, growing up. And it's very niche, kind of small at the time, but on our plane, we realized was the entire like choir tour group, and a bunch of my teachers, a bunch of my friends, a bunch of their parents. They were going, I think it was to New York for choir tour, and they had a layover in Houston,
Oh, wow. And
which
you
is
were
so
with your
strange.
parents.
I was with my parents and my siblings. Yeah. I was like, they only do one choir tour trip a year, and they just happened to be going to New York, which usually I feel like is a direct flight, but they were laying over in Houston on the exact flight that I was on. So I saw tons of friends, my friends' parents, old teachers and administrators. I felt very much at home because I'd gone to this private school for almost my entire K through
Wow.
12 experience. So they were all on the plane with me, basically the whole plane was people I knew. And then as we were taking off, I heard this voice in the chair in front of me. It sounded really familiar. I was like, wait a second. And I called out to the person in front of me, and I was right. It turned out that it was one of the senior couples that served in our mission, like our mission secretary and her husband, who was over the vehicles. In our mission, they had gone, I think it was like a baby blessing or something in Utah, a wedding, I don't remember. And they were returning home to Houston, and they were sitting in the chairs directly in front of me. And I remember writing in my journal, I was like, Heavenly Father's already shown me that this is going to be a divine trip. If he has filled the entire plane with my best friends and teachers from college, and the old senior couple who was there and saw everything that happened, from my first day to my last in Houston. I just knew without a
Wow.
shadow of a doubt that he was watching over me, right? And that this was going to be a very divine experience.
Wow, Lauren, that's so beautiful. Because again, our God is so abundant and so good. And the fact that you recognize all of that. So let me just ask you my final question.
Okay.
Why do you think it's important to recognize the hand of God in your life? Because you sure have.
That's a great question. I just feel like life is impossible without it. I think you look at bad experiences like this or just life in general day to day, and you can either choose to face it with God or without God. And either way, it's going to be hard. Sometimes people are like, oh, that's so hard to do my scriptures or to take time to go to the temple, or it's so hard to obey these commandments, whatever. It's like, yes, it's going to be hard to do these things, but it's also going to be hard without those things. And I think that when you choose life with God and you choose to acknowledge Him and you choose to praise Him and you choose to turn to Him through all of these things, like, yes, it doesn't change necessarily the nature of the trial, but it changes your ability to endure. And I can definitely say without a shadow of a doubt that without seeing these miracles and without acknowledging God's hand, without being able to rely on Him in this way, I wouldn't be who I am today. Right. But because I have, it's changed my nature, taught me more about Christ's atonement than I ever knew. It's given me opportunities to serve and to share, and open pathways for the rest of my life. And that's what Christ does. When we turn to Him, when we use Him and rely on Him and put Him first, He puts everything else into place and makes miracles in our lives. And that's why I named my social media The Work of His Hands, right? Because it is all Him. Like, all these miracles we've recounted, it wasn't me. I was just kind of laying there in a bed, and He just had it all happen to me and kind of spit me out the other side. But it's all Him. It's all His workings. Every single thing is so divinely appointed and inspired by Him. And so I'm just grateful to be here and a part of it and willing to share now.
Thank you so much for sharing. I truly appreciate it. That's a very scary experience, but you made it just beautiful. I love your testimony and the light that you share. And for anyone who wants to dig into your story a little bit, they can just find your social media, The Work of His Hands, with periods in between. And you don't post a ton on it anymore, but there's a lot about your experiences and about your testimony on there, and I love it. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat with me, and I just appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thanks for listening. If you have an experience where you have seen the hand of God or your higher power in your life, I want to hear about it. Please send an email to Sheila@beyondcoincidence.com. Have a great day.